My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. So last week we dealt with a conservative who was pro-rape, and of course all of his minions who would support that. Well, this week we have a conservative who believes that slavery wasn't actually that bad. Now, of course, this argument has no credibility, but a lot of times, for some reason, when you're dealing with conservatives, they have this thing where they argue against stuff. Like they'll say things like global climate change doesn't exist, and a big percentage of them believe that the earth is flat. So we kind of have to just deal with this. So I'm going to play a relatively short video for you, and it's of Jillian Michaels, and she's on CNN. Now, you might not know who she is, but Jillian Michaels is, I guess you could call her a celebrity, or she's pretty famous for being on The Biggest Loser, which was a show about getting these people to lose weight, and I don't have to get into the details on that. But before we get into this video, I want to talk about Jillian Michaels for a second, because I am in the health and fitness field. So I've been a personal trainer since about 1985. So figure about 40 years. I do have a college degree in exercise science. I have worked with clients one-on-one for about 40 years. I won my first show when I was 17 years old, an overall show. Actually, I won 2 overall shows that year. The first time I ever competed, I was 16. And I've been continuing for the next 4 decades of winning shows. And of course, I lose shows too. But the bottom line is that I've been heavily into it, and I've been working at a very high level, and I'm college educated in this field. So let's take a look at Jillian Michaels here. Does she have a degree in the health field? Answer, no. Now, I'm glad she is certified, because when I talk to people in this field, I do enjoy when they do get a certification. That's an important thing to do. However, her certifications are not the top level certifications, which would be NASM, and she doesn't have that certification. So she didn't even try to go for the top one. As a matter of fact, back in the day, probably about 30 years ago, when I had moved to Las Vegas, I was on a TV show, and they asked me, what's the difference between being a personal trainer in New York compared to Las Vegas? And they ended up throwing me off the show. Because one of the things I said is that in New York, I couldn't even get an interview unless I had a degree from a university. Well, in Las Vegas, if you look good in a tank top and you could talk pretty well, you can probably get a clientele. And so this is the type of thing, when I look at Jillian Michaels, like, how did she get that job in the first place? She never really had her own clientele. She just got put on a TV show. And no, she's not educated in the field. That's the answer. Now, you might ask, well, you don't need an education. She probably is really good at fitness. Like, how did she do in the shows that she's entered? Well, she's never won a show. She's never placed in a show. She's never entered a show. So she really does not have a degree of experience that a real fitness person would. For example, I've been around in this field, again, for like 35, 40 years. I don't know anybody who holds Jillian Michaels up as some type of expert in the field. She's what you would call is a celebrity. She's famous. She got on TV on a reality show. But in no way, shape, or form does anybody hold her up as an expert. I don't know anybody who wants to lose weight, gain muscle, who wants to be in a show, that would say, I have to get in touch with Jillian Michaels in order to know what she's doing. I need her to help me. There's nobody who's doing that as far as I know. So let's move on. Let me find the interview that she did on CNN. And I'm going to try not to stop it too much, but I'm going to have to, because one of the things that she does here is a very common thing when people don't really have the facts on their side. They like to gish gallop. which means that they'll say a bunch of stuff right in a row that are all lies. Now, if you have to attack each one of those lies, it means that you can't really have a conversation and talk. So we're going to look at some of this. I'm going to have to stop it because there's too much lying here and it's hard to keep up. And she starts right off at the beginning. So let me play this for you. Let me turn the volume up as much as I can. Ready, go.
And racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you anti-slavery, let's talk about the fact that
slavery in America was.
So you probably couldn't hear that well, but she's already with this annoying, like she's so frustrated, saying she's talking about the Smithsonian Institute, that you can't say that slavery is the fault of one race. Well, if you look over all of history, you can say that, right? There are different types of people that had slavery, that's true. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the United States. And the United States came here and murdered as many Indians as they could. That's the first part, ethnic cleansing. And if that wasn't good enough, then we brought black people here that didn't want to be here in slave ships to the United States. White people did that. Now, that's not saying I'm anti-white. It's just saying the truth. So when she says you can't say that, no, you have to say that because that's what we call a fact. Let me try to continue here.
Less than 2% of white Americans own slaves.
But it was a system of white supremacy.
Do you realize that slavery is thousands of years old?
White people
Do you know who in
America?
America?
She said, do you realize slavery is thousands of years old? That's true. But we're talking about the contribution of the United States with slavery. So again, she's a Trumper, and she's trying to put this America first, where they're trying to erase what's in the Smithsonian Institute. And they're trying to say that slavery is not that bad, or it just was not that big of a deal. And they're trying to justify this by saying that slavery was all around the world for a long time. Well, that's true, but it doesn't make us any better, does it? She does say a thing in here about that only 2% of white people had slaves. I'm going to answer that later because she says so many lies in here. It's really hard to keep up. So let's try it.
The first race to try to end slavery? Wait a second. Well, what's controversial?
I'm very surprised that you're trying to...
Again, they like to argue, but she said, who are the ones who tried to end slavery? This is a very popular thing for conservatives to say, because they'll say that white people are the ones who tried to end slavery in the United States. And again, that's so disingenuous. So let's answer the question in truth. Who do you think wanted to end slavery in the United States? I'm going to say the black people who were slaves. They wanted it to end pretty quick, didn't they? They weren't pro-slavery. They wanted it to end. And to be fair, there were certain people that were religious. And so because of their background, because they actually saw religion in the correct way, and they were white people that became abolitionists. But to be fair as well, that the abolitionists were white, but they were also obviously black. Let's continue.
I'm really surprised.
Do you realize that
Jillian, I'm surprised that you're trying to litigate who was the beneficiary of slavery and
I'm
who
not.
was not.
What I'm trying to tell you is
in
that...
the context of American history,
Okay.
in the context of American history, what are you saying is incorrect by saying that it was white people oppressing black people?
Every single thing is like, oh, no, this is all because white people bad. And that's just not the truth. Like, for example, every single exhibit, I have a list of every single one. Like, people migrated from Cuba because white people bad. Not because of Castro. Yes, no, it's in there. That's what I'm saying. You don't actually know what's in there. Do you know that when you walk in the
Jillian,
front door,
what exactly?
the first thing you see is a gay flag?
Jillian, you have a lot of stuff in front of you.
Yeah, I do.
What
because
exactly
because here's the
are
thing.
you talking about?
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
There's one called Change Your Game, right? This has been an installation there. Is gender testing fair in sports? Does that, and then it goes on to talk about how it's complex to do gender testing in sports. It's not complex, it's basic science. That's untrue. It's XX chromosome, XY chromosome. That's sports. Is it fair to have biological men competing against biological women in sports? No, but why is this in the Smithsonian? So it's been completely captured.
First of all, I don't.
And it's totally partisan.
First of all, we don't have time to litigate all of this.
Of course we don't, because then you're going to lose the argument. And everything is racialized, just like you're trying to do to me now.
Excuse me.
It's like, I can't believe you're trying to suggest, that
just to be clear, you brought up race.
No,
this was a conversation about the arts, and you brought up race.
It isn't.
You brought up.
But the whole point of this is that the issue
you brought up slavery, and you brought up the question of whether you brought up the question of whether or not slavery in the United States is about race. The answer is yes. Slavery in the United States
don't
is
straw man my argument,
race.
because that's not what I said.
So what are you
brought
talking
up
about?
Slavery, and what I was talking about is that this isn't really about that. When you make every single exhibit about white imperialism when it isn't relevant at all, that is a problem. So when you're talking about Cubans leaving Cuba and you make it about white people bad, that's not accurate.
Can I just say something?
That's my point.
All right, we're going to move on
I
from
was saying,
that.
You cannot tie imperialism and
Okay, they're yelling over each other, and so it's hard to get all that. There's not actually a lot there, because she lies a lot. She's trying to make it seem like a lot. But one of the things that's interesting here that is very important to note, that we're talking about Donald Trump, and he's trying to be this fascist president, right? That basically owns everything and is trying to rewrite history. And one of the things that's very interesting in the Smithsonian right now, what they talk about when they talk about there's 2 presidents that have been impeached, that's not true. There were 3 presidents who were impeached. One of them, Donald Trump, who was impeached twice. And Donald Trump told them to take it out of there. And they bent, because they're afraid. I don't know why, but they're afraid. So they took it out. So if you go to the Smithsonian Institute and you're looking to see a museum, the reason why some of these things are not going to be factual is because the president and these conservatives are trying to rewrite history. And one of the things they're doing is trying to rewrite this thing about slavery. Now, nobody said it was the white people who caused people to come here from Cuba. I mean, we all know it was Castro. We got that. So I don't know why she keeps saying that. And again, one of the things that is wrong with our country, after you hear this, is why is Jillian Michaels being invited on CNN? First of all, again, like I told you, in terms of even in the fitness field, she made a lot of money. But does she have actual credibility? No. She's not a scholar. She's not an expert in history, that's for sure. She's just on there trying to get attention. And to be fair, CNN invites her on there because they know that they're going to get ratings and attention also. In 2016, Jillian Michaels was anti-Trump, and now she's pro-Trump. Why would she do that other than to get the attention that she's so seeking here? Interestingly here, one of the things that she mentions, and it's very hard to hear on that because they're yelling at each other, but she had a problem, I guess, with the rainbow flag or something like that being at the Smithsonian. Okay, so you're not into this whole LGBTQ community thing. However, Jillian Michaels is married, and she's married to a woman. So the right that you have to enjoy, and I don't even like to say it like that because I think people should just love who they love. I don't think the state should get in the way of this. But she is allowed, quote unquote, to be married in the United States, and that's because of liberals who she seems to not like. So I can't wait for the conservatives to go after her and take away her right to be married as well. Because it's funny, like when you see somebody who's angry, violent, authoritarian, this type of thing, brutal, a dictator, people think that if they give them something that they'll be treated nice. That's not true. What happens is that when you try to appease a monster, the monster just gets more powerful and takes more. And so at some point, this is going to come back to bite her. So let's go with the slavery is not that big of a deal or not that bad argument. So let's go from an empathy and compassion and a human or a morality and virtue point of view, which she's not seeming to have here. She's downplaying historical atrocities and human suffering, the dehumanization of millions of people. Obviously, slavery is, by definition, forced labor. The family separations that went on here, the raping that went on there, the physical and psychological trauma, human beings being treated as property, none of that bothers her because she said it's only 2%. 2% of white people had that. But here's the thing. In conservative world, if somebody gets murdered, for example, they'll say, well, one person is too many. I agree with that. But they have been doing this full court press for years now about that we need to throw out the immigrants, we need to put people in jail, we need to throw them out because of the crime rates are so terrible, and they'll point out a person who was murdered or whatever happened. So it's true that it's one too many. But what they're not looking at is that the crime rates have been going down for over 30 years. So in their thing, they'll find the one wrong thing that happens and they blow it up to monumental proportions. So let's use the same theory. If you believe that only 2% of white people had slaves, isn't that 2% too many? Not in Trump conservative world, it's not, because they don't really care that much. They're trying to push this white agenda and they're trying to justify things. As I told you before, they're complaining that, oh, well, there was slavery in other countries. Well, that doesn't make it okay. There is no argument there. It's stupid. So let's go with this 2% of white people had slaves argument, because it's a lie. The way they do that is that you have the North and the South. And the North, to be fair, they did have slaves. Not as many, of course, but they did have some slaves, but very few compared to the South. But when they're counting these numbers of percentages of white people who had slaves, they're counting the people in the North, who by and large didn't have any slaves. So you can't count that. Let's just go with that. And then they start trying to count the people in the South. So if you're a mother and father and you have like 5 kids, one of them, let's say, is a 6-month-old baby, they're counting all of those as white people and if they have slaves. That's not fair to do, right? The way you want to do it is you want to count households. That's how you do it. This household, do they own slaves? Not the amount of white people in that house, but the amount of households. That's how you do it. With that number, in the year 1860, 25% of households had slaves. 1 out of every 4 houses had slaves. And let's be honest about this, because if you're a conservative, you're going, well, that means 3/4 of them didn't. You needed some money to have slaves. So those other 75% of households who didn't have slaves, it's like a person today saying, I wish I had a Corvette or a Lamborghini in my driveway, but I don't have the money for it. So those 75% were aspiring to be slave owners. They wanted the money to be able to get slaves because it was profitable for them. And just like it does today, when you have money, you can make more money. So 25% of households down south had slaves. That's part of the answer. Now we can dig into the numbers even more, because in Mississippi, 49% of the households had slaves. South Carolina, 46% of households had slaves. Now, in the lower South, let's take a look at some more of these numbers. Because when we say, again, like Jillian Michaels did, and yes, I'm blaming her, but she is cherry picking things from other conservatives. And it's this big white broom that pushes forward. And always be scared when these people say, I do my own research. Because they go into this pseudoscience BS and they all say the same things. that she thinks she's smart because she thinks she has these talking points. But all she's doing is reading the same talking points that they all do. If you go on one of their podcasts, it'll lead you to other podcasts, and they all say the same thing. They're just like parrots. They just keep repeating the same garbage. In the Lower South, there were 2.4 million slaves. How many is that? That's 47% of the total population. So down south, when the white people had all the power, and it may be true that in certain areas, only 25% of the households, not only, but 25% of the households had slaves or owned slaves. When you look at the numbers, there was an equal amount of black people and white people. So they had control over almost 2.5 million slaves just in the Lower South. I'm not even talking about some of the other areas. So for her to say something like that is unbelievably stupid, and she has no credibility. So that's my speech on that. There is no debate here. By the way, when we're talking about Jillian Michaels not having an education, so I am also a licensed marriage and family therapist as well, which is another degree. And my other degree, I have got a minor in Civil War history. So she's screwing with the wrong person, okay? Just because she watched a couple of YouTube shows with these conservative idiots doesn't make her an expert, because everything she's saying is a flat out lie and it's wrong. And she doesn't even know, because she's so uneducated. She doesn't have critical thinking. She doesn't know how to know that it's wrong. She doesn't know the real information. Real quick, because she tried to, again, do the Republican, let's throw in the transgender thing. I think the last time I looked, there's only like 10 people in all the United States that are transgenders who compete in the NCAA. So does it affect anybody? No. You have a better chance of getting hit by lightning. Now, I know in some ways, like, it could be controversial for people, but she did say something that was very odd too. She said that the testing is very difficult. She said the testing was not difficult. But if you talk to the people in the Olympics, they will tell you that the testing actually is pretty difficult. Who are you going to believe? I'm going to believe scientists. Now, in this area, I'm definitely not a scientist, but let me just offer this for you because of my unique background. So if you're looking at, let's say in bodybuilding, right? If you have a man who has, let's say naturally has about 300 nanograms per deciliter of testosterone, that's relatively low, right? But you could have a man who's not enhanced, has 600 or 700 nanograms per deciliter, which is a lot more. Does that put him at a competitive advantage? Of course it does. Now, what if you take testosterone when you have 300 nanograms per deciliter and move it up to, say, 700 so you can compete? Is that illegal? Yes, it is. But it gets into this confusing area, because if I'm being honest with you, I know women that have way more testosterone than any middle-aged man. I mean, their testosterone is massively high because they'll take testosterone. Now, I'm not saying that makes them a man, but if you were trying to have a sex change, you would be taking hormones to become a man. But in bodybuilding, you are taking hormones to compete, but you are becoming a man, but nobody says that. So is it true that they'll have a clitoris that grows to a point where you're not sure if you're looking at a small boy or not? That's true. They are becoming men. Is it true that they can grow a beard? Yes. Is it true that they can have male pattern baldness? Yes. So are they technically men? Well, I don't know. If we're going by chromosomes, no. But I think it gets a little bit sketchy. It's hard to tell. I know a lot of bodybuilders that just are so against this whole, they don't even want to talk about transgender. They think it's this terrible thing. And I'm like, wow, how weird. Because you're a woman who's taking so much testosterone that you have to shave every day. Yet you're in this transgender thing. So that's just my own personal, maybe little bias here, that I don't know why people hate people. They'll try to throw transgenders under the bus. Meanwhile, they are literally on a program to become men. So I think that's really interesting. Anyway, to make a long story short here, we're 25 minutes in. Jillian Michaels has no credibility. And the fact that she's a mouthpiece talking about this, acting like she does, the scary thing here is that the more airtime that people like Jillian Michaels get, there are people who are racist enough and they want to have a way to justify themselves, and they will latch on to some of her ridiculous arguments and think it's true when it's not. So my name is Joe Peroni. This is the Rise Above Project. Please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.